We're in the engine room of a 74-foot motor yacht, and I'm going to talk a little bit about primary fuel filtration. This vessel, like many other diesel-powered recreational yachts, is equipped with tandem primary fuel filters. Tandem filters mean that we have two filters, and we're running on one of those at a time, and we're using a selector valve to decide which of those we're running on. This is a very common setup. Many vessels are set up with this with good reason, because it gives you essentially a spare filter that you can have ready to go at any time, and you can switch to it very easily and very quickly if you know how to do it. The selector valve allows you to determine which one of the filters that you're running on, and the point on the valve points to the filter that's active or online. The other filter is offline, and while that filter is offline, you could even change the element if you wanted to, if you had to, but otherwise it's essentially disconnected from the fuel system while you're running on the one that's pointed, that the valve is pointing to. In order to change this, which you can do while you're underway, by the way, you would simply rotate this 180 degrees, and it will switch the supply to the other filter, and it would then be running on this filter in this case. So it's important that you understand what this valve does. If you point this handle up, by the way, and this is important to know, it turns the fuel off, essentially. So that means that no fuel will get to the engine. It's a good anti-theft device, but don't forget to turn it on when you're ready to get underway. Otherwise, the engine will die within a few minutes, typically. If you turn this valve so that the handle is pointing down, that means both of the filters are online at the same time. Now, that's common to see that, but really it's disadvantageous because it means you have no spare. It defeats the purpose of having a tandem fuel filter arrangement. So I don't recommend that you do that. Set it up so that it's running on one or the other. The body of this fuel filter is actually stenciled with some very small lettering that's very difficult to see. This says off up here, so when the handle is pointed down and the point is pointed up, everything is off. So if you looked closely, you would see that. Most people don't know that it's there. So some other features about these filters that are worth spending a few minutes on. You'll notice that the labels are blue. That indicates that they are MA series filters, meaning that they have a marine rating from Underwriters Laboratories. And one of the things that makes them rated for marine applications is the heat shield, which we'll look more closely at in a moment, as well as a metallic drain rather than a plastic drain. What that means is that in the event of a fire, these filters are capable of withstanding 2.5 minutes of exposure to flame without leaking fuel. Very important, obviously, yet many vessels are equipped with filters that do not carry that MA rating. The label on those filters that are not rated for marine use are brown or orange or black in some cases. They are not blue. If that's the case, they are not equipped with the heat shield or the metallic drain. They're not appropriate for use in a marine engine room, and they lack approval by the American Boat and Yacht Council, or ABYC. Another feature that this tandem filter arrangement has is a vacuum gauge. This is actually an aftermarket vacuum gauge. It is not the one that these filters came with, but it happens to be a very good one. It's the one of choice as far as I'm concerned. It includes what's called an indicator or drag needle, which is this red needle, and it will record the highest vacuum that these filters have experienced while the vessel was underway. And it will save that reading, essentially. So even when the engines are shut down, you can come into the engine room and look at that red needle and know where the high vacuum was, essentially. You only get an accurate vacuum reading on primary fuel filters when the engine is running under load, preferably at cruising speed. So to look at it after the engine is shut down with an ordinary vacuum gauge would do you no good. The same would be true at idle speed. But with the drag needle, it saves that reading, so you can come back and look at it anytime, even after the engine is off. It's important to remember to reset it once you've read it, so that you're back to zero, essentially, and you know that when you're starting out, you're good to go again for the next run, and that will record again the highest reading that you've experienced. So we're looking at the bottom of these fuel filters now, these primary fuel filters, and we can see pretty clearly that they've got these silver bowls on there. That bowl is a mystery to many people. It's not a funnel, and it's not designed to catch fuel that spills. It's a heat shield, so flame that was underneath these filters would be deflected away from these plastic bowls for some period of time, not indefinitely, but at least for the required 2.5 minutes. So it's very important that every marine application filter have that heat shield on it. The filters of this variety should include this. You'll also notice that these filters have an optional metallic drain valve. Now, if you buy these filters off the shelf, essentially with the blue label, the MA series filter, it's going to come with a metallic drain plug. That meets the letter of the law, but it's very inconvenient to use. In order to drain water out of this filter, you essentially would have to have 2 wrenches and hold the main nut with 1 wrench and turn the drain plug with the other. It's messy, it's inconvenient. You can fit this aftermarket valve. It's not just any valve. It too is a Underwriter Laboratory or UL rated fuel valve. And one of the things that distinguishes it from other fuel valves is that the handle only turns through 90 degrees, so you know when it's off. So when it is perpendicular to the flow of fuel, you know that it's off from a distance, and it cannot turn 360 degrees like other valves. It can only turn through 90 degrees, and it also has provisions for a plug to be screwed into the bottom of that drain valve, so it's sort of a belt and suspenders approach, so that if this valve got opened accidentally, fuel could not come out of the filter. And potentially, depending on where the filters are located in the fuel system, in some cases, a leaking fuel filter could actually drain the entire fuel tank on the boat, hundreds of gallons, if not more. So it's important that the drain valve be that UL rated variety and that it have that drain plug in there. Another feature that distinguishes this valve from an ordinary valve is that it does not use a spring to hold tension on the valve to keep it from leaking. It uses a packing instead. The reason that we don't want to use a spring is that the spring is steel and it can rust. And if it rusts and falls out, then this valve can leak. So again, it's a special valve, costs a little bit more, but it's well worth it. Make sure that any valve that you get for your filters is a UL listed marine fuel valve. Another feature that these filters have is an optional water sensor. So there is a probe that is located in the bowl. You can see the wire here. This one is led into that bowl area and plugs up from the bottom of this filter, and it has 2 sensors on it, or 2 small pieces of metal that will trigger an alarm at the helm station when water reaches them. So when the water starts to rise in this bowl and it makes it to the sensor, an alarm will sound at the helm, so you'll know long before the level of water becomes critical that you've got water accumulating in that filter and it's time to drain it out. Looking more closely at the vacuum gauge on a tandem filter, as I mentioned, this is an aftermarket gauge. It's a little bit different than the standard gauges that are available, but I think it has advantages that are worth getting. One of those is this red drag needle, which is resettable with this knob in the middle. What that needle will do is it will be dragged by the black needle, which is the actual vacuum measurement, and this needle will stay wherever that black needle was highest. So you can come back and look at this valve at any time and know what the highest vacuum reading was. You'll also notice that there's liquid inside this gauge. That's glycerin, and that is a vibration dampening measure, so that in an engine room or near an engine, these needles are not shaking all the time. The liquid dampens that vibration motion. And also you'll notice that this gauge has a valve on it that enables you to equalize the pressure inside the gauge. If the barometric pressure inside the engine room changes or the weather changes, we can end up with that black needle moving a little bit like that one just did a minute ago. And this valve allows you to neutralize or equalize the pressure outside versus inside so that you get an accurate reading at all times.